My girlfriend came to me at my family reunion and asked, "Why are you here?" I almost choked on my lemonade. We'd been dating for 2 years and she'd never been to one of my family events before. I looked at her confused. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I'm surprised you're here. No offense, but I didn't invite you." The backyard went quiet. My aunt stopped gossiping by the grill and my uncles paused their cornhole game. Everyone was staring at us with these strange smirks on their faces. Then I heard it, that obnoxious hyena laugh from across the yard. My 3 older cousins, Tony and Barry and Dan, were practically falling over themselves laughing by the garage. Tanya pulled out a folded invitation from her purse. It had the same gold trim and fancy lettering as mine, same address and time and everything. We compared them side by side, and they were identical, except hers was addressed to Tanya at her apartment. "Someone sent this to me last week," she said quietly. "It said I was specially invited to meet everyone." Those idiots by the garage were now taking pictures of us with their phones. My blood started boiling because I knew they were behind this somehow. They always were. These three had been making my life miserable since I was 8 years old. Every single family reunion was torture. When I was a kid, they would hold me down and spin their razor scooters super fast, so the metal part would smash into my ankles over and over. I still have scars from that. When I got a little bigger, they would literally pick me up and throw me back and forth playing monkey in the middle while I screamed for my mom. They put ghost peppers in my birthday cake when I turned 13. I spent the whole party crying in the bathroom while they laughed outside the door. In high school, it got worse. They found out who my girlfriend was and all three of them started texting her. Tony actually convinced her to dump me and date him instead. Then when he got bored, he passed her to Barry and then Dan. They sent me pictures the whole time. College was supposed to be my escape, but they followed me to a party once and slipped something in my drink. I woke up with no shirt in the middle of campus covered in permanent marker. They had videos of me pooping and vomiting at the same time, all over the frat house, and me cleaning it up the next morning. They showed everyone at Christmas that year. I tried calling the cops so many times, but their dads are all officers in town. My complaints always mysteriously disappeared. My parents said I was being dramatic and to just avoid them at family events, but standing there with Tanya looking confused and hurt while they laughed at us was the last straw. I stormed across the yard and shoved Tony hard in the chest. He stumbled back into the garage door. "What sick game are you playing now?" I shouted. Barry stepped forward with that stupid grin on his face. "Whoa, calm down, little cousin. We're just having some fun." "Fun? You invited my girlfriend here to humiliate me somehow, right? What's the plan this time?" Dan was recording everything on his phone. The whole family had gathered around us now. My mom was trying to pull me back, but I shook her off. "You really want to know?" Tony asked, wiping blood from his lip where he'd hit the garage. "Fine, but don't get mad at us. You're the one dating your own cousin." The words hit me like a truck. I turned to look at Tanya, who had gone completely pale. Tears were streaming down her face. "What?" she whispered. "That's not possible." "I'm not." "I would know if—" Barry pulled out his phone and showed us a bunch of old Facebook photos. There was a woman who looked exactly like Tanya, but older, standing with my Uncle Robert at some bar. More pictures of them together at different places. Then a birth certificate with Tanya's name and my uncle's signature. "Your mom had an affair with Uncle Rob 23 years ago," Dan explained like he was proud of himself. "We've known about our secret cousin for years. Dad told us when he was drunk one night. So we looked you up, Tanya. Found out you went to State University just like our favorite little cousin here." Tony jumped in excitedly. "We made fake dating profiles and made sure you two would match. Sent you to the same coffee shop at the same time. Even got Willie's roommate to invite you to that party where you met." My legs felt like jelly. 2 years. We'd been together 2 years. I had a ring hidden in my apartment. I was going to propose next month on our anniversary. "This is sick," I screamed. "You're all sick. How could you do this to us?" Nobody moved. They all just stood there staring at me and Tanya like we were some kind of show they paid to watch. Tony was still laughing that horrible laugh that made me want to rip his throat out. The invitation fell from Tanya's hand and landed in the grass. She made this sound like a hurt animal, and then she was running toward the house. Her whole body was shaking with sobs, so hard I could see it from across the yard. My mom finally snapped out of whatever trance she was in and grabbed my arm. I shoved her hand away so hard she stumbled backward. Everyone's sick and twisted, and I told them that. I screamed it at all of them standing there with their guilty faces and shocked expressions. "You're all sick. Every single one of you." My voice cracked on the last word, but I didn't care. I took off running after Tanya. She disappeared through the back door into the house, and I could hear her crying getting farther away. When I got inside, I followed the sound down the hallway. My aunt was standing outside the bathroom door with her arms crossed. She looked at me and actually had the nerve to smile a little. "The boys were just having some fun," she said. "Just a harmless prank to liven things up." I wanted to punch her in her stupid smiling face. The bathroom door was closed and I could hear Tanya throwing up on the other side. I pounded on the door with both fists. "Tanya, please let me in. We need to talk about this. Please just open the door." Her voice came back muffled and broken. "Go away. Just go away. Please go away." Then I heard the lock click into place. My dad appeared at the end of the hallway looking annoyed instead of concerned. He told me to calm down and stop making a scene. Stop making a scene. Like I was the problem here. Like I was the one who just destroyed everything. I turned to look at him, and something in my expression made him take a step back. The urge to punch him in his face was so strong my hands were shaking. Uncle Robert came out of one of the bedrooms looking pale and sick. When he saw me, his eyes went to the floor. He knew. He knew this was coming. He wasn't surprised at all. I got right in his face, close enough to see the sweat on his forehead. "Is it true? Tell me right now if it's true. Is Tanya really your daughter?" He just nodded without looking up. "It happened a long time ago," he said. Like that made it better somehow. Like the fact that it was years ago meant it didn't matter now. The casual way he said it made something explode in my chest. I shoved him as hard as I could, and he stumbled backward into the porch railing. He caught himself, but barely. His face went even paler if that was possible. I turned to go back toward the bathroom, but Barry and Dan were in the hallway now with their phones out. They were still recording everything. Dan was narrating like it was some kind of nature documentary. "And here we see the moment of realization," he said in this fake, serious voice. Barry Barry was laughing so hard he could barely hold his phone steady. I lunged at them, ready to smash both their faces into the wall. My dad grabbed me from behind, and two of my uncles appeared out of nowhere to help hold me back. The three of them had to use all their strength to keep me from getting to the cousins. Barry and Dan backed away down the hallway, still laughing and calling me crazy. "Look how crazy he is," Dan said to his phone. "Totally lost it." My roommate appeared in the doorway to the backyard, looking scared and confused. "Should I call someone?" he asked. Nobody answered him. Everyone was too busy either restraining me or backing away from me or recording me. The bathroom door opened and Tanya came out with my aunt holding her elbow. Tanya's face was red and blotchy and completely destroyed. Mascara ran down her cheeks in black streaks. She wouldn't look at me. She kept her eyes on the floor and moved toward the front door. I broke free from my dad and the uncles and ran after her. "Tanya, wait. Please wait. We need to talk about this." She was already in the driveway heading for her car. When I caught up to her and tried to touch her arm, she pulled away. She just kept shaking her head over and over. I can't. I can't. The words came out like a chant. "I can't do this. I can't be here. I can't." She got in her car and locked the doors. I stood there watching her start the engine. "Tanya, please." She backed out of the driveway without looking at me once. I watched her car disappear down the street. My legs felt weak and I thought I might fall over. When I walked back to the yard, everyone was standing around in this awkward silence. The show was over and they didn't know what to do with themselves. Some people were leaving quietly through the side gate. Others were pretending to be interested in their phones. My mom came toward me with this pathetic, apologetic look on her face. Her hands were reaching out like she wanted to hug me but didn't dare. I looked right at her and asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Did you know? Did you know about Uncle Robert and Tanya's mom?" She opened her mouth and then closed it. The pause was too long. Way too long. Her eyes went to the ground just like Uncle Robert's did. I realized right then that she'd known for years. Probably since Tanya was born. Probably since before I even met Tanya. My own mother knew and never said a word. I started yelling at all of them. Who else knew? Tell me who else knew about this. I looked around at the faces and saw guilt everywhere. My aunt looked away. One uncle coughed and studied his shoes. Another uncle suddenly needed to check something on the grill. My grandmother stepped forward with her chin up high. "Family business stays in the family," she said. "You never should have brought that girl around here in the first place." The victim blaming was too much. Something inside me just snapped completely in half. I told them all to go to hell. Every single one of them. Then I turned and walked to my car. My hands were shaking. So bad I could barely get the key in the door. I got in and slammed the door and just sat there for a second. My roommate ran over and knocked on the window. He asked if I was okay to drive and I nodded even though I wasn't sure. He said he'd follow me back to the apartment. I drove in this weird daze where everything felt far away and not quite real. I almost ran 2 red lights because I couldn't focus on anything. The traffic lights just blurred together with all the other lights. My roommate's car stayed right behind me the whole way. When we got to the apartment, he followed me inside. He didn't know what to say, so he just sat down next to me on the couch. I stared at the wall for I don't know how long. Everything felt numb and wrong and broken. Then I remembered the engagement ring. It was still hidden in my sock drawer where I'd been keeping it for 3 weeks. I got up and went to my room and opened the drawer. The little black box was right there under my gym socks. I took it out and opened it. The ring caught the light from my desk lamp. I'd spent 2 months' pay on this ring. I was going to propose next month on our anniversary. We had reservations at that fancy restaurant downtown. I had this whole speech planned out. Now I was sitting here holding this ring and everything was destroyed. I tried calling Tanya. The phone rang once and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I called 17 times that night. Every single time it went straight to voicemail. I sent her text too, even though I knew I shouldn't. "I'm so sorry. This isn't our fault. Please talk to me. We can figure this out together. Please just talk to me." I sent message after message. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a response. "I need space. Please stop." That was all it said. 5 words. Then when I tried to call again, the number was blocked. I lay in bed that whole night, not sleeping at all. I just stared at the ceiling, going over every moment of our relationship. The coffee shop where we met. They sent us both there. The party where we really connected and talked for 3 hours. Willie's roommate invited her on their orders. Our first date at the movies. Was that manufactured too? Our first kiss in the parking lot after dinner. Did they plan that somehow? Every moment I thought was real and special, and ours might have been part of their sick plan. 2 years of my life. 2 years of falling in love and making plans and building a future. All of it was fake. All of it was them pulling strings like we were puppets in their twisted game. The next morning I woke up after maybe 2 hours of sleep, and my whole body felt heavy and wrong. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and started scrolling through everything. My messages with Tanya from when we first started talking. The dating app where we matched. I opened the app and really looked at my profile for the first time in 2 years. My favorite bands were listed as The Strokes and Arctic Monkeys. My favorite movies were Eternal Sunshine and Lost in Translation. I liked hiking and trying new coffee shops and reading science fiction. Then I pulled up Tanya's profile from my matches, and my stomach dropped. Her profile said she loved The Strokes and Arctic Monkeys. Her favorite movies were the exact same ones. She also liked hiking and coffee shops and reading science fiction. Every single thing matched perfectly. I scrolled through the rest of her profile, and it was like looking at a mirror. They had designed us to be perfect for each other. I checked the account details and saw my profile was created on March 15th 2 years ago. Hers was created March 14th, 1 day apart. I went through my old Facebook messages and found the conversation with Willie's roommate about that party. "Hey man, you should come to this thing at our place Friday. Gonna be chill. You should bring that girl from your stats class if you want." I remembered thinking it was weird he knew about Tanya, but I was so excited about maybe seeing her again that I didn't question it. I found the coffee shop meetup too. My friend had texted me saying he heard about this great place downtown, and we should check it out Saturday morning. The same morning Tanya showed up there. Every single thing was planned. My roommate knocked on my door around noon and came in with a sandwich. He set it on my desk and told me I needed to eat something. I said I wasn't hungry, but he didn't leave. He sat down on the edge of my bed and said I should talk to someone at the University Health Center. I looked at him and said, "I couldn't couldn't talk to anyone about this because how would I even explain what happened without sounding completely insane? He said I couldn't just sit here destroying myself, and maybe professional help would give me tools to process everything. I told him to leave me alone, and he finally left, but the sandwich stayed on my desk. I didn't eat it. I tried to do some homework that afternoon, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. The words in my textbook just looked like random letters. I had 4 classes on Monday, and I missed all of them. Tuesday, I had 3 classes, and I missed those too. I had 2 assignments due, and I didn't turn them in. By Wednesday morning, my inbox had an email from my professor for advanced statistics. The subject line said, "Checking in." I opened it, and he wrote that he noticed I missed class Monday and Tuesday, and wanted to know if everything was okay because I had never missed before. He said if I needed an extension on the problem set, he could work with me. I stared at the email for 10 minutes trying to figure out what to say. "Sorry, Professor. I found out I've been dating my cousin for 2 years thanks to my family's sick manipulation scheme. Sorry I can't focus on statistics right now because my whole life is a lie." I closed the email without responding. On Wednesday afternoon, I got in my car even though I knew I shouldn't. I drove across town to Tanya's apartment building and parked in the lot. I sat there for over an hour just staring at her building. I kept hoping I would see her come out or walk up or something. I didn't even know what I would say if I saw her. I just needed to see her. After an hour, her roommate came out of the building and walked toward the parking lot. She saw my car and recognized it, and her face changed. She walked over and stood by my window looking uncomfortable. I rolled it down and she said Tanya went to stay with her parents for a while and wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. I asked when she was coming back and the roommate just shook her head and said she didn't know. Then she walked to her own car and left. I drove back to my apartment and made it inside before everything hit me at once. I started crying so hard I couldn't breathe, and then I was throwing up in the bathroom just like Tanya did at the BBQ. My roommate must have heard me because he came in and found me on the floor. He helped me up and got me to the couch, and he stayed home from his own classes that afternoon. He sat there with me and made me drink water, and he said I had to call the counseling center. I kept saying I would, but he wouldn't let it go. He made me promise I would call them, and I finally agreed just to get him to stop asking. That night my phone rang and it was my mom. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was crying before she even said hello. She said she was so sorry and she should have told me years ago about Uncle Robert's affair, but the family made her promise to keep quiet. She said they thought it was better if nobody knew because it would destroy too many lives. I asked her if she knew what Tony and Barry and Dan were planning, and she swore she didn't. She said she had no idea they even knew about Tanya being related to us. I wasn't sure I believed anything she said anymore. She kept apologizing and crying, and I finally hung up on her. Thursday morning, I called the University Counseling Center and made an appointment for Friday. The woman on the phone asked what I needed to talk about, and I said family stuff. She scheduled me with someone named Holden for 9 in the morning. Friday came, and I walked to the counseling center feeling like I might throw up again. I sat in the waiting room for 15 minutes, and then Holden called my name. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, and he had a calm way of talking that made me feel slightly less panicked. We sat down in his office, and he asked what brought me in. I didn't know where to start, so I just sat there for a minute. He didn't rush me or try to fill the silence. He just waited. Finally, I blurted out the whole story, starting with the BBQ and going backward through all the abuse, and then forward to finding the evidence on the dating app. I talked for probably 30 minutes straight, and he just listened and took notes. When I finished, he said this was significant trauma, and it would take time to process. He didn't look shocked or disgusted or like he thought I was crazy. He just looked at me like I was a person who needed help. He explained that I was dealing with multiple layers of trauma at the same time. The revelation about the relationship being incest, the betrayal by my family who knew and stayed quiet, the loss of my relationship with Tanya, and all the years of abuse by my cousins coming back up. He said each layer needed attention, and we would work through them together. He gave me some immediate things to try when I felt overwhelmed, breathing exercises and grounding techniques and permission to feel whatever I was feeling. We scheduled 2 sessions per week, and for the first time since the BBQ, I felt like maybe I could survive this. By the end of the first week, I still hadn't heard anything directly from Tanya. Then Saturday afternoon, I got a text from her roommate. It said Tanya was seeing a therapist too and needed time to process everything separately. The message made it clear that our romantic relationship was over. I already knew that, but seeing it written out broke something in me all over again. I spent the whole weekend in bed, barely eating or moving. My roommate brought me food and water, but mostly left me alone. Monday morning, I forced myself to get up and go to class. I showered and put on clean clothes and walked to campus. Everything felt fake and far away, like I was watching myself from outside my body. I sat in advanced statistics and tried to pay attention, but none of it made sense. After class, my professor asked me to stay back. He said he was glad to see me and asked if I still needed that extension on the midterm project. I told him I had some family stuff going on, and he nodded like he understood. He said I could have an extra week, and if I needed to talk to anyone, the counseling center was a good resource. I thanked him and left before he could ask any more questions. I walked across campus with my backpack feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out without thinking. Text from Dan. I should have deleted it right away, but something made me open it. Video attachment. I tapped it and my stomach dropped. It was footage from the BBQ showing Tanya running toward the house crying and me chasing after her. Dan's voice was doing this nature documentary narrator thing, talking about the mating habits of confused mammals. I could hear Tony and Barry laughing in the background. My hands started shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone. I blocked Dan's number, then I blocked Tony's, then Barry's. My finger hovered over the delete button for the video, but I saved it instead. Evidence. I shoved my phone back in my pocket and had to physically stop myself from getting in my car and driving to their houses. The urge to smash their faces in was so strong I could taste it. Instead, I went back to my apartment and slammed the door so hard my roommate jumped. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I started going through everything on my phone. Every text message, every social media post, every photo from the past 2 years. I made a timeline in a notebook notebook writing down when Tanya and I met and all the coincidences that led up to it. The coffee shop where we first talked. The party where we really connected. Our first date at that restaurant neither of us had been to before. I pulled up old screenshots from group chats and found one where someone mentioned that party. Willie's roommate had posted about it saying there would be free beer and everyone should come. I searched through my contacts until I found his number. It was almost midnight, but I called anyway. He answered sounding confused and half asleep. I asked him about the party and why he invited both me and Tanya. There was a long pause. Then he admitted Tony had paid him $200 to make sure we both showed up. He said Tony told him it was for a prank, but he didn't know what kind. He kept apologizing, saying he needed the money for rent and didn't think it would hurt anyone. I hung up on him. The next morning, I went back to the dating app where Tanya and I had matched 2 years ago. I logged into my old account and searched for her profile. It was still there. I looked at mine too. When I really studied them, I could see how perfectly they were designed to match. We both listed the Strokes and Arctic Monkeys as favorite bands. Both said we loved Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Both mentioned hiking, even though I'd only been twice in my life. I clicked on the account settings for my profile and found the IP address where it was created. I didn't recognize it. Then I looked up how to trace IP addresses and spent 3 hours figuring it out. The address that created my profile came back to a location in Tony's neighborhood. I screenshotted everything. The profiles, the IP address, the trace results. I made a folder on my laptop and started dumping everything in there. Screenshots of Willie's roommate's texts, the video Dan sent, photos of the fake invitation Tanya got. I didn't know what I was going to do with it all, but having it organized made me feel slightly less crazy. I googled lawyers who handle harassment cases and a name kept coming up. Carlos Mendez. I saved his contact info in my phone. My second appointment with Holden was on Thursday morning. I walked into his office and sat down in the same chair. He asked how the week had gone, and I told him about the video and the investigation and finding out about the money. Then we started talking about the childhood stuff. I showed him the scars on my ankles from the scooters. I told him about the ghost pepper cake and being thrown around like a toy. I described every family reunion where I got hurt or humiliated, while everyone else laughed or looked away. Holden took notes and asked questions about how my parents reacted when I told them what was happening. I explained that they always said I was being dramatic or too sensitive. He helped me see that this latest thing with Tanya wasn't just one sick joke. It was part of a pattern that had been going on since I was 8 years old. The cousins had always gotten away with hurting me, and this was just the biggest, cruelest thing they'd done so far. Before I left, he suggested I might want to report the abuse history to the police, even if nothing came from it legally, just to have it on record. I wasn't sure, but I said I'd think about it. That afternoon, I called the non-emergency police line. The officer who answered sounded bored. I started explaining that I wanted to file a report about harassment and emotional abuse by my cousins. He took down my name and their names. Then I mentioned that Tony's dad and Barry's dad and Dan's dad all work for the police department. The officer's whole tone changed. He got quiet for a second. Then he said someone would follow up with me, but he didn't sound like he believed it. I asked when I should expect a call back, and he said within a few days. I knew right then that nothing was going to happen. 2 weeks went by and nobody called. I went to classes and therapy and tried to avoid thinking about my family. Then on a Thursday morning, someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw my dad standing there. I thought about not answering, but he knocked again. I opened the door and he walked in without waiting for an invitation. He sat down on my couch and started talking about how the family was worried about me. He said everyone understood I was upset, but I needed to understand they were just trying to protect Uncle Robert's reputation and his marriage. I stood there staring at him. I asked who protected me and Tanya. He got defensive. His face turned red and he said I was being dramatic about what the cousins did. It was just a prank that went too far. Boys being boys. I felt something snap inside me. I pulled up my jeans and showed him the scars on my ankles. I asked if he remembered when this happened. He looked at the scars and nodded. I asked why he didn't stop it. He said he thought I needed to toughen up, that letting the cousins pick on me a little would make me stronger. I asked about the ghost pepper cake, about being thrown back and forth until I threw up, about the high school girlfriend they stole from me, about the party in college where they drugged me. He admitted he knew about most of it. He said he thought it was normal cousin stuff and I was too sensitive. The casual way he dismissed years of torture made my hands clench into fists. I walked to the door and opened it. I told him to get out. I said not to come back until he was ready to actually admit what happened and stop making excuses. He stood up looking angry instead of sorry. He said I was tearing the family apart over nothing. I didn't say anything else. I just held the door open until he left. Then I slammed it and locked it and sat on the floor shaking. My third therapy session with Holden was the following week. We talked about the confrontation with my dad and how it felt to finally say all that stuff out loud. Holden said I was making progress in setting boundaries with people who enabled the abuse. Then he brought up something new. He said I might benefit from connecting with other people who'd experienced family betrayal. He had information about a support group that met on campus every Tuesday night. I told him I didn't want to sit around with strangers talking about my problems. He said I didn't have to share anything if I didn't want to. Just listening to other people's stories might help me feel less alone. I said talking to strangers sounded terrible. He didn't push it. He just encouraged me to think about trying one session. I agreed to consider it, but I didn't mean it. A few days later, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Tanya's roommate. The message said Tanya wanted to know if we could meet somewhere neutral to talk. She suggested a coffee shop across town that neither of us had been to before. I read the message about 10 times. My first thought was no way. Seeing her would be too painful. But then I realized I wanted to see her. I needed to see her. I texted back saying yes, and we agreed on Saturday afternoon. I spent the whole next day anxious and going over what I would say. I practiced different versions of the conversation in my head. I'm sorry this happened to us. I never wanted to hurt you. We were both victims. Nothing sounded right. Saturday came and I drove to the coffee shop 30 minutes early. I sat in my car in the parking lot watching people go in and out. At exactly 2 o'clock, I saw her walk up. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she had dark circles circles under her eyes. When she saw me through the window, her face did this complicated thing where she looked sad and relieved at the same time. I went inside and we got coffee and sat at a table in the back corner. For a minute, we just looked at each other. Then she started talking. She told me she'd been staying with Wayne and Raina Buchanan. Those were her adoptive parents. They raised her since she was a baby. They were furious about everything that happened. She said she'd been doing genetic testing to confirm that Uncle Robert was really her biological father. We both knew it was true, but she needed the official results. Her voice was quiet and careful. We talked around our feelings like we were walking on broken glass. She said she knew we couldn't be together anymore as a couple. I nodded. I already knew that too, but hearing her say it out loud made my chest hurt. She said we were both victims of the same cruel scheme, that Tony and Barry and Dan had used us like toys. I agreed. I told her I was sorry for everything, even though none of it was my fault. She said she was sorry too. We sat there for over an hour just talking carefully about what happened and what came next. Before we left, she asked what I was going to do about the cousins. I told her I was building evidence and thinking about my options. She said she wanted them to face consequences too. We exchanged new phone numbers with the understanding that we'd stay in touch as friends. Not what we wanted, not what we planned, but it was all we had left. She looked down at her coffee cup and started talking again. She told me Wayne and Raina knew about Uncle Robert being her biological father the whole time. Her birth mother made them promise never to tell her because she wanted Tanya to have a normal life without the complications of knowing her real dad was some guy who wouldn't claim her. The Buchanans thought they were doing the right thing by keeping the secret. They thought they were protecting her. But now Tanya felt like everyone in her life had lied to her. Her adoptive parents, her birth mother who she'd never even met, Uncle Robert who pretended she didn't exist, and my whole family who knew and said nothing. She started crying again, and I reached across the table without thinking. We held hands and cried together in that coffee shop while other customers pretended not to notice. We weren't crying because we wanted to be together anymore. We both knew that was impossible now. We were crying because 2 years of our lives had been stolen by people who thought our pain was entertaining. We were mourning the relationship we had and the future we'd planned. The engagement ring in my sock drawer that would never get used. The apartment we'd talked about getting together next year. The life we thought we were building. All of it was gone because 3 cruel men thought it would be funny to manipulate us into falling in love with our own cousin. Before we left the coffee shop, Tanya asked me what I was going to do about Tony and Barry and Dan. I told her honestly that I didn't know yet, but I wasn't letting them get away with this. She said she wanted them to face consequences too. She wanted everyone to know what they did. We exchanged new phone numbers since she'd blocked my old one. We agreed we'd stay in touch as friends and allies against the people who hurt us. It wasn't what either of us wanted. It wasn't what we planned, but it was what we had now. We hugged in the parking lot and it felt wrong because hugging her used to feel like coming home, but now it just felt sad and complicated. Then she got in her car and drove away, and I sat in mine for 20 minutes before I could make myself start the engine. Tuesday night I went to the support group meeting Holden had told me about. It was in a basement room at the student center, and there were maybe 12 people sitting in a circle on folding chairs. I felt awkward and out of place. Everyone else seemed to know each other already. They were chatting and laughing before the meeting started like this was a normal social thing. A woman who introduced herself as the facilitator asked if anyone wanted to share. A guy around my age raised his hand and started talking about his older brother. He said his brother had sabotaged his relationship with his girlfriend by telling her a bunch of lies about him cheating. The brother thought it was funny to watch the relationship fall apart. He filmed the breakup and posted it online. The specifics were different from what happened to me, but the theme of family betrayal hit hard. Someone else shared about their parents choosing their sibling over them in a custody battle. Another person talked about their aunt stealing their identity. When it was my turn, I shared a condensed version of what happened. I didn't use names or go into all the details. I just said my cousins had manipulated me into a relationship that turned out to be inappropriate, and they did it on purpose to hurt me. Several people nodded like they understood. After the meeting ended, 3 different people came up to me and said they were sorry that happened. One woman gave me her number and said to call if I ever needed to talk. I left feeling slightly less alone than when I arrived. My mom kept trying to reach out over the next few days. She sent apologetic texts saying she was sorry and she loved me and she wanted to fix things. She left voicemails crying and begging me to call her back, but I wasn't ready to engage with her yet. At my next session with Holden, I showed him all the messages. He helped me work on setting boundaries with family members who enabled the abuse. He said I had every right to take space and time to process everything that happened. We drafted a message together explaining that I needed distance before I could consider rebuilding any relationships. I told her I couldn't be around people who knew what was happening and chose to stay silent. I sent the message to my parents and several aunts and uncles who I knew had been at family events where the cousins tortured me. Most of them didn't respond. My dad sent back one line saying I was being unfair. My mom sent 3 paragraphs of justifications and excuses. I deleted them without reading past the first sentence. I decided to file a formal complaint against my cousins with the police department, even though I knew it probably wouldn't go anywhere. I gathered all my evidence into a folder. Screenshots of the fake dating profiles, messages from Willie's roommate admitting Tony paid him, photos of my ankle scars, a timeline of abuse incidents going back to when I was 8. I drove to the police station on a Thursday morning and asked to speak with someone not related to my family. The officer who came out to take my statement was younger than I expected. He seemed sympathetic as I explained everything. He took notes and looked through my evidence folder. But when I mentioned that Tony's dad and Barry's dad and Dan's dad all worked for the department, his expression changed. He warned me that proving emotional manipulation was difficult in court. He said harassment cases rarely went anywhere without physical violence or direct threats. When he learned my uncles were on the force, he basically confirmed nothing would happen. He took my statement anyway and gave me a case number. He told me someone would follow up, but his tone made it clear he was just going through the motions. A few days later, I got a call from a sergeant. He said they'd reviewed my complaint and determined there was insufficient evidence of criminal criminal activity. The manipulation of my relationship wasn't illegal even if it was cruel. The childhood abuse was too far in the past to prosecute. The harassment wasn't specific enough to meet the legal definition. He suggested I pursue a civil case instead if I wanted accountability. The dismissal felt like another betrayal. I was furious but not surprised. That night I sat at my desk and looked up Carlos Mendez again. I'd saved his contact information weeks ago when I first started researching harassment lawyers. I stared at his phone number for a long time. I wasn't sure I could afford a lawyer. I was a college student working part-time at the campus bookstore. But I also couldn't just let this go. I couldn't let Tony and Barry and Dan win again like they always did. At my next therapy session, I told Holden about the police dismissal. He wasn't surprised either. He said sometimes the systems that are supposed to protect us fail. He suggested I focus on what I could control rather than what I couldn't. We worked on identifying concrete steps toward healing. Continue therapy twice a week. Maintain boundaries with toxic family members. Keep building a support system through the group meetings. Eventually process the grief over losing Tanya as a romantic partner. The framework helped me feel less powerless. I couldn't control whether the police took my cousin seriously. I couldn't control whether my family apologized or acknowledged what happened, but I could control my own healing process and who I let into my life going forward. I was having coffee on campus a few days later when a guy approached my table. He introduced himself as Dane and asked if he could sit down. I didn't recognize him, but he said he was related to my family somehow through marriage. He'd heard about what happened at the BBQ through the family gossip network. He wanted to reach out because he'd witnessed my cousin's abuse when we were kids. He was at a family reunion when they did the scooter thing to my ankles. He remembered me screaming and crying while they laughed. He was only 12 at the time and didn't know what to do, but it had bothered him for years that nobody stopped them. He said he was sorry he didn't speak up back then. Hearing someone actually acknowledge what happened and say they witnessed it made something crack open in my chest. I'd spent so long being told I was dramatic or exaggerating. Having someone confirm the abuse was real and wrong meant more than I could explain. Dane and I ended up talking for over 2 hours. He told me his dad Frank used to be a police officer in the same department as my uncles. Frank left the force 5 years ago because of corruption issues. He got tired of watching officers cover up problems for their families and friends. Dane said his parents had talked about my family before. They knew my uncles had a reputation for making complaints disappear. He offered to connect me with his parents who might be able to help navigate the system or at least provide advice. For the first time, I felt like someone outside my immediate situation actually believed me and wanted to help. Not because they had to, not because I was paying them, just because they thought what happened to me was wrong and they wanted to do something about it. The next day, I drove to the address Dane had given me. Frank and Lorraine lived in a nice house on the other side of town. They welcomed me in and we sat at their kitchen table. Frank confirmed everything Dane had said about my uncles. He told me they had a reputation for covering up problems for family members. Traffic violations, bar fights, domestic disputes, all kinds of stuff got swept under the rug if you were related to the right people. Lorraine worked for CPS, and she explained that while the police wouldn't help, there might be other ways to pursue accountability. She said I should document everything and be prepared for the cousins to escalate their behavior. She said when people like that don't face consequences, they usually get worse. They think they're invincible. Frank mentioned that Carlos Mendez was actually a family friend of theirs. He offered to make an introduction. He explained that Carlos sometimes took cases for reduced fees when police connections created barriers to justice. I accepted gratefully and felt like maybe I wasn't completely alone in this fight after all. Frank pulled out his phone right there at the kitchen table and called Carlos. He explained the situation briefly, and Carlos agreed to meet with me the next day. Frank gave me the address of Carlos's office downtown and told me to bring all my evidence. Lorraine wrote down a list of things I should document, including dates, witnesses, and any physical proof of the cousins' behavior over the years. I left their house feeling like I had actual allies for the first time in this whole mess. The next afternoon, I drove to Carlos's office in a building near the courthouse. The waiting room was small but clean, and a woman about my age greeted me from behind the desk. She introduced herself as Carmela and said she was Carlos's wife and business partner. Carlos came out a minute later and shook my hand. He was maybe 50 with graying hair and kind eyes that made me feel like he actually cared about what happened to me. We sat in his office and I laid everything out for over an hour. The scooter attacks when I was a kid, the ghost pepper cake, the high school girlfriend they stole and passed around, the drugging incident at college, every single thing they'd done to hurt me over the years. Then I explained the whole manipulation scheme with Tanya, how they created fake dating profiles, how they engineered our meeting, how they revealed it all at the BBQ to destroy us both. I showed him screenshots of the fake profiles and messages from Willie's roommate admitting Tony paid him. I played the video Dan sent me after the BBQ. Carlos took notes the whole time and asked questions about specific dates and details. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a minute. He told me honestly that criminal charges were unlikely because proving emotional manipulation is really hard, and my uncle's connections made it even harder. But he thought there might be grounds for a civil harassment case. Carmela spoke up and said she was a private investigator. She offered to dig into my cousin's activities to see if there were other victims or patterns of behavior that would strengthen a case. I asked how much this would cost because I was just a college student with barely any money. Carlos said he'd work with me on payment, and we could start with Carmela's investigation, which wouldn't cost much up front. I agreed immediately and signed some papers giving Carmela permission to investigate on my behalf. Over the next 2 weeks, Carmela worked like crazy digging through social media, old police reports, and public records. She called me one afternoon with her findings, and I could hear the anger in her voice. Tony had been reported for harassment by an ex-girlfriend 3 years ago, but the complaint mysteriously disappeared from the system. She found the girl through Facebook and got her to confirm the story. Barry had multiple traffic violations that were dismissed, including a DUI that should have cost him his license. Dan was involved in a fight at a bar where he put another guy in the hospital, but no charges charges were ever filed. The pattern was crystal clear. These three had been getting away with hurting people for years because their dads made problems disappear. Carmela documented everything with dates and names and evidence. She created a file that was like 50 pages long showing how they'd been protected their whole lives. When she sent it to me, I spent hours reading through it all and feeling sick. How many people had they hurt? How many complaints got buried? I brought the file to my next meeting with Carlos and he reviewed it carefully. He explained that we could file a civil suit for something called intentional infliction of emotional distress, but he warned me it would be expensive and emotionally draining with no guarantee of winning. The cousins would fight back hard, and their lawyers would try to destroy my credibility. However, he thought the threat of a lawsuit might be enough to make them back off, especially with all this evidence of their pattern of behavior. He suggested sending them cease and desist letters as a first step. That would be affordable, and it would show them I was serious about pursuing legal action. The letters would demand they stop all contact with me and stop spreading information about me or Tanya. If they violated the cease and desist, we could use that as evidence in a future lawsuit. I told Carlos to send the letters. I was done being scared of these people. The letters went out on a Monday, and by Wednesday my phone was blowing up with angry calls. My dad called 6 times. My uncles called. Even some aunts I barely knew were calling to yell at me. I didn't answer any of them, but I saved every single voicemail as evidence like Lorraine had taught me. My dad's message said I was tearing the family apart over nothing. One uncle said I was being vindictive and needed to let the past go. Another uncle threatened to cut me off from family events permanently if I didn't drop this. The messages just proved that nobody cared about what happened to me. They only cared about protecting the cousins and keeping everything quiet. On Thursday evening, someone knocked hard on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw my aunt standing there, Tony's mom. I opened the door with the chain still on and she immediately started yelling. She said I was ruining her son's life over a harmless prank. She demanded I drop the legal action right now. I told her the prank wasn't harmless and what they did to me and Tanya was sick and cruel. She said Tanya was fine and I was overreacting like always. That made something snap in me and I told her if she didn't leave immediately I would call the police. She laughed and said the police wouldn't do anything because they knew my family. I pulled out my phone and started dialing and she finally left, but not before saying I would regret this. I recorded the whole interaction on my phone's voice memo app and sent it to Carlos that night. A week later, Carmela called with something big. She'd found 2 other young women who had similar experiences with my cousins. One girl named Ashley had her relationship completely destroyed when Barry created fake evidence that her boyfriend was cheating. He photoshopped messages and created fake social media accounts to make it look real. The boyfriend tried to prove his innocence, but Ashley didn't believe him and they broke up. She only found out the truth months later when someone told her they'd seen Barry bragging about it. Another girl named Monica was humiliated at a party through some scheme Dan put together. Carmela wouldn't give me details over the phone, but said both women tried to report the harassment to police and were dismissed. Both were willing to talk to me and potentially help with a case. I felt sick knowing I wasn't the only victim, but also weirdly validated. This was a real pattern. They'd been doing this to people for years and getting away with it. Carmela arranged for all of us to meet at Carlos's office the following Tuesday. I showed up nervous and found 2 women about my age already sitting in the waiting room. Ashley was tall with dark hair and looked angry. Monica was shorter and blonde and looked scared. We all introduced ourselves awkwardly, and Carlos brought us into a conference room. For the next 3 hours, we shared our stories. Ashley told us about the fake cheating evidence and how it destroyed a relationship she thought would last forever. She showed us screenshots Barry had created that looked completely real. Monica described a party where Dan convinced everyone she'd been talking badly about them. He'd sent fake texts from her number somehow, and by the end of the night, she'd lost most of her friends. Both of them had tried reporting it to the police. Ashley's complaint was taken by an officer who happened to be Barry's uncle. It never went anywhere. Monica's report was filed, but then lost in the system. Hearing their stories made me furious all over again. These weren't pranks or harmless fun. This was systematic cruelty by people who knew they were protected. Carlos listened to everything and took detailed notes. When we finished, he explained that with multiple victims willing to testify to a pattern of behavior, we had a much stronger case. He could file a civil suit on behalf of all of us, or we could potentially get media attention that might force some accountability. He was honest that a lawsuit would take months or years and cost money none of us really had, but he thought the threat of multiple victims going public might be enough to get a settlement or at least make the cousins face some consequences. Ashley said she was interested in pursuing action. She was tired of watching Barry get away with hurting people. Monica was more hesitant because she was scared of retaliation, but she agreed to stay involved. We exchanged phone numbers and created a group chat. Carlos said he'd put together a formal complaint outlining all our cases and the pattern of behavior. In the meantime, we should document any contact or harassment from the cousins or their families. We left that meeting feeling like we'd formed some kind of alliance. We were all victims of the same people, and we were finally fighting back together. I had a therapy session with Holden the next day and told him about everything that was happening: the cease and desist letters, the angry family calls, meeting Ashley and Monica, the potential lawsuit. Holden listened carefully and helped me process it all. He said taking action was part of my healing even if the outcome wasn't perfect, but he warned me about the emotional toll of pursuing justice against family members. Things would probably get harder before they got better. My family would likely escalate their pressure on me to drop everything. The cousins might try new ways to harass or intimidate me. I needed to be prepared for that and have coping strategies ready. We spent the rest of the session working on those strategies: ways to manage anxiety when family members called, techniques for staying calm when confronted, plans for what to do if I felt overwhelmed. Holden also suggested I consider limiting my social media presence for a while, since the cousins might try to use that against me. I agreed, and that night I made most of my accounts private and blocked anyone connected to Tony, Barry, or Dan. A few days later, Tanya texted asking if we could meet for coffee. We'd been keeping some distance while we both have processed everything, but I missed talking to her. We met at the same coffee shop across town where we'd talked before. She looked better than last time, less exhausted and more determined. I told her about meeting with Carlos and Carmela, about the cease and desist letters and my family's angry response, about finding Ashley and Monica and learning there were other victims, about the potential civil case we were building. Tanya listened to everything and said she'd been doing her own processing and therapy. Her counselor was helping her work through the identity issues and the betrayal. She decided she wanted to confront Uncle Robert directly about abandoning her and lying about her existence for 23 years. She wanted to tell him exactly how his cowardice had hurt her. I asked if she wanted me there for support, but she said no. This was something she needed to do alone, but she thanked me for telling her about the legal action. She said knowing I was taking action against the cousins made her feel less powerless. Like maybe they wouldn't get away with destroying our lives completely. We talked for over an hour about everything we'd both been through since the barbecue. It was weird sitting across from someone I'd loved and planned to marry, talking like friends instead of partners. But there was still real care between us. We'd both been victims of the same cruel scheme, and that created a bond even if the romantic relationship was over. Before we left, she asked me to keep her updated on the case. She wanted to know if the cousins faced any real consequences. I promised I would, and we hugged goodbye in the parking lot. It hurt, but it also felt right somehow. We were both moving forward separately, but we weren't completely alone. My grandmother called 3 days later, demanding I come to a mandatory family meeting at her house to resolve the situation. She said I needed to apologize for causing trouble and making the family look bad. I told her I wasn't apologizing for anything and hung up on her. She called back 5 more times that day and left angry voicemails about respect and family loyalty. Dane heard about the meeting through his family connections and texted me offering to go in my place to document what everyone said. I agreed because I wanted to know what they were planning, but I couldn't handle being in a room with all of them. Dane showed up at my grandmother's house with a notebook and his phone recording audio. My relatives were shocked to see an outsider walk through the door instead of me. According to Dane, they spent 2 hours trying to pressure him into convincing me to drop everything. My grandmother kept saying I was tearing the family apart over nothing. My uncles claimed the cousins were just playing a harmless prank. My mom cried and said I was being cruel by involving lawyers. Dane told them he witnessed the cousins abusing me as a kid, and none of them did anything to stop it. That made everyone go quiet for a minute before they started making excuses again. He recorded the whole thing and sent me the audio file that night. Listening to my family defend Tony and Barry and Dan while painting me as the villain made me sick, but it also strengthened my resolve. Carlos called me the next morning saying he received a response from Tony's lawyer. They were threatening a countersuit for defamation if we moved forward with legal action. The letter claimed we were making false accusations to damage their reputations, and they would seek damages for emotional distress. Carlos wasn't worried at all. He spent the afternoon drafting a detailed response outlining every piece of evidence we had collected. The fake dating profiles traced to Tony's computer, Willie's roommate's testimony about being paid to invite us to the party, Ashley and Monica's statements about similar schemes, the documented history of abuse going back over a decade, the police reports that mysteriously disappeared. Carlos laid it all out in careful legal language and gave them 2 weeks to respond with a settlement offer, or we would file the civil suit officially. He sent me a copy of the letter, and reading it made me feel like someone finally believed me and was fighting back. During the 2-week waiting period, I tried to focus on my schoolwork and maintain some kind of normal routine. My brain kept jumping to worst-case scenarios about the lawsuit, but I forced myself to sit down and work on my statistics midterm project. The professor had been understanding about my situation without me having to explain details. I spent hours in the library running calculations and building graphs for my data analysis. It felt good to focus on something concrete with clear right and wrong answers. When I turned in the project, I got a decent grade, which felt like a small victory. I wasn't completely falling apart even though everything else in my life was chaos. My roommate noticed I was eating regular meals again and sleeping more than 3 hours a night. Small improvements, but they mattered. Tanya called me one afternoon crying so hard I could barely understand her at first. She had gone through with confronting Uncle Robert at his office downtown. She told me he admitted everything without much resistance. He said the affair happened 23 years ago, and he made the choice to protect his marriage and reputation by staying out of her life. Tanya said she called him a coward to his face and told him she wanted nothing to do with him ever again. He tried to justify his actions by saying he thought she was better off with the Buchanans as her parents. She hung up on him and left his office. Now she was working with Wayne and Raina to formally establish that they were her real parents in every way that mattered. She said the confrontation didn't give her closure, but it did give her clarity about who actually cared about her. We talked for an hour, and I listened while she processed everything out loud. Before we hung up, she thanked me for being someone she could trust even after everything that happened. The 2-week deadline came and went with no settlement offer from the cousins. Carlos called to confirm they weren't responding, so he was filing the civil suit officially that afternoon. Within 2 hours of him filing the paperwork, my phone started exploding with text messages. My dad sent 3 long messages calling me vindictive and saying I was destroying the family over a stupid prank. My aunt said I should be ashamed of myself for attacking her sons who were just having fun. Several cousins I barely knew sent messages saying I was being dramatic and cruel. Multiple relatives blocked me on social media, and I watched my friend count drop throughout the evening. My mom sent an email that was 6 paragraphs long begging me to reconsider because this was tearing everyone apart. She said family was supposed to forgive each other and move forward together. I had to stop myself from responding that they destroyed things first by letting Tony and Barry and Dan torture me for years. Instead, I saved all the messages as evidence of continued harassment and turned off my phone. Carlos warned me the lawsuit would move forward slowly through the legal system and could take months or even a year to reach any kind of resolution. He said civil cases always took longer than people expected, and I needed to be patient. In the meantime, Carmela kept kept investigating and digging up information about the cousins. She called me one morning with news that Tony had recently lost his job for workplace harassment. Apparently, he made inappropriate comments to several female coworkers, and HR finally fired him after multiple complaints. Carmela said this strengthened our case about his pattern of behavior toward women. She was also finding evidence that Barry had been fired from 2 previous jobs for similar issues. The cousins were starting to face real consequences for their actions for the first time in their lives. Other people were finally seeing what they were really like instead of just believing their charm and lies. The University Counseling Center invited me to speak at a campus event about family trauma and setting boundaries. Holden thought it would be good for my healing process to share my story, even though the idea terrified me. I spent a week writing and rewriting what I wanted to say. On the day of the event, I stood in front of about 40 students and spoke for 15 minutes about my experience without using any names. I talked about growing up with family members who hurt me and how hard it was to set boundaries when everyone expected you to just forgive and forget. My hands were shaking the whole time and my voice cracked twice, but I got through it. Afterwards, several students came up to me with their own stories of family betrayal and abuse. One girl told me her brother sabotaged her college applications. A guy shared how his cousins spread rumors about him in high school. Having people understand and relate to what I went through made me feel less alone and weird. Ashley and Monica and Tanya and I started meeting weekly at a coffee shop to process our experiences and support each other through the legal process. Having people who truly understood what I was going through made a huge difference in how I was handling everything. We could talk about the frustration of dealing with lawyers and family pressure without having to explain or justify our feelings. Monica brought up the idea of calling ourselves the Cousin Survivors Club as a joke, and it stuck. We even made unofficial membership cards on Monica's printer. The group became a safe space where we could be honest about how hard everything was, but also celebrate small victories. Ashley got into grad school. Monica started dating someone new. Tanya moved into her own apartment. I made it through midterms without failing anything. We were all building lives separate from the people who hurt us. 6 months after the barbecue, the cousin's lawyer finally reached out to Carlos about settling out of court. They were offering a financial settlement and written apologies to all victims in exchange for us dropping the suit and signing agreements that we wouldn't talk publicly about what happened. Carlos called me and the others to explain the offer in detail. He went through the pros and cons carefully without pushing us toward any particular decision. The money would help cover therapy costs and legal fees we had all been struggling with. The written apologies would be official acknowledgement that they did something wrong. But the part about not being allowed to share what happened publicly bothered all of us. Carlos made it clear this decision belonged to me and Ashley and Monica together, since we were all part of the case. Our group met at Monica's apartment to discuss the settlement offer, and we ended up talking for over 3 hours about what justice actually meant to us. The money would definitely help since we were all dealing with bills from lawyers and therapists. Having written apologies felt important because it would be proof that we weren't making things up or being dramatic. But the rule about not sharing our stories publicly felt like letting them off easy. Ashley pointed out that other potential victims wouldn't be able to find information about what these guys did if we had to stay quiet. Monica said the money might be worth it if it meant we could finally move forward and stop dealing with legal stress. Tanya reminded us that even with the agreement, we could still tell people privately and warn anyone who might be at risk. I kept going back and forth about whether taking the settlement meant they were winning or if it meant we were finally getting some kind of acknowledgement for what they put us through. At Carlos's office 3 days later, we sat around his conference table trying to decide what to do about the settlement offer. Ashley kept tapping her pen against her notebook, and Monica had her arms crossed, looking frustrated. I stared at the papers in front of me listing all the terms they wanted us to agree to. The money would help a lot, but the part about staying quiet bothered all of us. Carlos sat at the head of the table waiting patiently while we talked it through. Ashley spoke first, saying she wanted other people to be able to find information about what these guys did if they searched online. Monica agreed and pointed out that the non-disclosure agreement would basically let them hide everything. Tanya had joined us for this meeting, even though she wasn't officially part of the lawsuit, and she said she understood wanting to protect future victims. We went back and forth for over an hour discussing every angle. Finally, I suggested we counter with our own terms, and everyone agreed. We told Carlos we would accept the settlement, but only if the apologies were public and they removed the non-disclosure requirement completely. Carlos wrote everything down and said he would present our counteroffer to their lawyer. He warned us they might reject it, and we would have to go to trial, but we all felt it was worth trying. The waiting after that was brutal because we knew they could say no and drag this out for months or even years. Carlos called me 4 days later with their response. They rejected our counteroffer completely and said if we wanted to proceed, they would see us in court. My stomach dropped when he told me because I knew what that meant. Depositions and more legal expenses and having to relive everything in front of lawyers and judges. Carlos assured me he believed in our case and was willing to work with us on costs. He said he could reduce his hourly rate and set up a payment plan. That same afternoon, Frank and Lorraine called to say they wanted to help cover some of the legal fees. Frank explained that he had seen too many cases like mine get buried because victims couldn't afford to fight back. Lorraine said they believed in what we were doing and wanted to support us. Over the next week, a few other family friends who had heard about the situation reached out and contributed money to a legal fund that Carmela helped set up. Having that support made the whole thing feel less impossible, even though I was terrified about the depositions. My deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at a law office downtown. I met Carlos in the lobby, and he walked me through what to expect. Tony's lawyer would ask me questions and try to make me look bad or unstable. Carlos told me to stay calm and answer truthfully, and he would object if anything got too out of line. We went into a conference room with a court reporter and Tony's lawyer, who was this older guy in an expensive suit. He started off asking basic questions about my background and education. Then he shifted shifted to my relationship with Tanya and started asking really personal stuff about our intimate life. Carlos objected, but the lawyer kept pushing. He brought up my therapy sessions with Holden and asked if I was mentally unstable. He wanted to know if I had ever been diagnosed with any conditions or taken medication for anxiety or depression. Carlos objected again and told me I didn't have to answer questions about my medical history. The lawyer got frustrated and changed tactics. He started asking about my childhood and the incidents with my cousins. I could tell he was trying to make it sound like I was exaggerating or making things up. He asked why I never reported the abuse earlier if it was so bad. He questioned why I stayed in contact with family members who supposedly enabled the abuse. Every question felt like an attack, but I kept my voice steady and explained clearly what happened. I talked about the scooter attacks and showed him the scars on my ankles. I described the ghost pepper incident and the drugging at the party. I explained how their dads were cops and my complaints disappeared. The lawyer seemed annoyed that I wasn't breaking down or getting defensive like he wanted. After 3 hours, he finally ran out of questions and we were done. Carlos told me I did great and that my testimony was clear and consistent. Ashley's deposition happened 2 days after mine, and Monica's was the day after that. Carlos called me after both were finished and said they went similarly to mine. The lawyers tried to paint them as vindictive or unstable, but both women stayed calm and articulated exactly what the cousins had done to them. When you laid all 3 stories out together, the pattern was obvious. These guys had been hurting people for years in calculated ways. Carmela called that same week with news that she found another victim willing to come forward, some guy from their high school who they bullied badly for 2 years. He was hesitant at first because he had tried to report it back then and nothing happened. But when Carmela explained that other victims were speaking up, he agreed to give a statement. Carlos added his testimony to our case file, and suddenly we had 4 separate people describing years of predatory behavior. The mounting evidence made it clear this wasn't about one incident or some family drama. This was about 3 men who enjoyed hurting people and got away with it because of their family connections. Carlos said he felt confident going into trial with this much documentation. 2 weeks before the trial date, Carlos got a call from the cousin's lawyer. I was in class when my phone buzzed with a text from him asking me to come to his office as soon as possible. I left early and drove straight there. When I walked in, Ashley and Monica were already sitting in the waiting room looking confused. Carlos brought us all into his conference room and explained that the cousins had made a new settlement offer. This time they agreed to most of our demands. Written apologies to all victims with specific acknowledgments of what they did. Financial compensation for everyone. And they would drop the non-disclosure requirement, except for the specific dollar amounts of the settlement. Carlos said they were finally taking us seriously because they realized a trial would expose everything publicly. Their lawyer apparently told them that with 4 victims testifying, the jury would likely side with us. The new offer was sitting on the table in front of us, and we had 48 hours to decide. Ashley picked up the papers and started reading through them carefully. Monica asked Carlos what he thought we should do. He said ultimately it was our choice, but in his professional opinion, this was probably the best outcome we would get. A trial was risky even with strong evidence, and it would be emotionally draining for all of us. The apologies wouldn't be posted publicly, but they would be documented, and we could share them with anyone we wanted. The money would help us move forward and get the support we needed. Our group met one final time at Monica's apartment to vote on accepting the settlement. We ordered pizza and sat around her living room going through every detail again. Ashley said she wished the apologies could be more public, but she understood the compromise. Monica pointed out that at least we could warn people privately about what these guys did. Tanya said having documented proof of their wrongdoing was better than nothing. I kept thinking about how exhausting a trial would be and whether I could handle weeks of testimony and cross-examination. We talked for hours about what justice actually meant and whether this settlement counted as real accountability. Finally, we took a vote and it was unanimous. We would accept the offer. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't everything we wanted, but it was acknowledgement that we were right and they were wrong. We called Carlos that night and told him our decision. He said he would contact their lawyer first thing in the morning and get the paperwork started. The relief I felt was mixed with frustration because part of me wanted to see them suffer more, but another part of me just wanted to be done with the legal battle and start healing. The written apologies arrived by certified mail 2 weeks later. I signed for the thick envelope and sat on my couch staring at it for a while before opening it. Inside were 3 separate letters, one from each cousin. Tony's was 4 pages long, and he admitted to orchestrating the whole relationship manipulation with Tanya. He listed specific things he did like creating the fake dating profiles and coordinating our schedules. He acknowledged that what he did was cruel and caused serious harm. Barry's letter was shorter, but he admitted to his role in the childhood abuse and apologized for the physical attacks. Dan's letter confessed to ongoing harassment and acknowledged that he participated in tormenting me for years. Reading them was strange because the words sounded sincere, but I knew they were probably written by lawyers. Still, seeing it all in writing validated everything I'd been saying. They couldn't deny it anymore or claim I was being dramatic. I texted Ashley and Monica to see if they got their letters too, and they both confirmed they did. We agreed to meet up that weekend to talk about how we were feeling. Tanya got a letter too, even though she wasn't part of the lawsuit, and she said reading Tony's admission about manipulating our relationship made her cry, but also gave her some closure. I used part of my settlement money to pay for continued therapy with Holden. We had been meeting twice a week, but my insurance only covered so much, and I had been stressing about the bills. Having the financial breathing room meant I could focus on actually healing instead of worrying about costs. I also paid off a chunk of my student loans, which felt amazing, because that debt had been hanging over me since freshman year. Tanya used her settlement money to move into her own apartment, away from both the Buchanans and her biological family. She needed space to figure out who she was separate from all the family drama. Ashley enrolled in grad school like she had always wanted, and Monica started taking art classes she couldn't afford before. We all stayed connected through our weekly coffee meetings and group texts. The Cousin Survivors Club became a real support system where we could be honest about the hard days and celebrate the good ones. Having people who understood what I went through without me having to explain made a huge difference in my recovery. My relationship with my parents stayed complicated and strained. I told them I would maintain limited contact, but I wouldn't attend any family events where the cousins were present. I also made it clear I wouldn't pretend everything was fine or act like nothing happened. My mom called crying and said she understood even though it hurt her. She admitted she should have protected me better when I was a kid. My dad took longer to come around, and he still thought I was being too harsh. He kept saying family should forgive family, but I explained that forgiveness didn't mean accepting abuse. Some relatives reached out privately to apologize for not stepping in when they saw what was happening. My aunt on my mom's side sent a long letter saying she always knew the cousins were cruel, but she didn't realize how bad it was. A few cousins from the other side of the family messaged me saying they were proud of me for standing up to them. Those small gestures helped a little, even though they didn't erase the years of being ignored. I set boundaries about what topics we could discuss and what events I would attend. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than cutting everyone off completely. Tanya and I started meeting for coffee every few weeks as friends. The first few times were awkward because we both felt the grief of losing what we had, but gradually it got easier to just be around each other without all the romantic history weighing us down. She told me about a guy she met at work who seemed nice, and I was genuinely happy for her. I had gone on a couple dates with someone from one of my classes, but nothing serious yet. We talked about how weird it was to have the strangest origin story of any friendship. Tanya joked that if anyone asked how we met, we would have to give them the very long version. I said we could just tell people we were college friends and leave out all the complicated family stuff. She laughed and said that was probably smart. There was real care between us and mutual respect for how we both handled an impossible situation. We had survived something together that most people couldn't even imagine. That bond meant something even if it wasn't romantic anymore. Sometimes I still felt sad looking at her and remembering what we lost, but mostly I just felt grateful we could still be in each other's lives. We both agreed that staying connected was important because we understood each other's trauma in a way no one else could. Graduation day came in May, and I walked across that stage in my cap and gown with my degree finally in hand. Frank and Lorraine Winters sat in the third row, cheering louder than anyone else when they called my name. Dane brought a huge sign that said, "You did it," and held it up while taking pictures. Willie was there with his girlfriend, and they both hugged me afterwards, saying they were proud of how far I'd come. Ashley and Monica drove up together, and we all took group photos outside the auditorium. My parents showed up, but we kept things surface level with quick congratulations and a few awkward pictures. My mom cried a little and tried to hug me for a long time, but I pulled away after a few seconds. My dad shook my hand and said he was glad I finished on time. We didn't talk about the family stuff or the cousins or anything real. After 10 minutes, they left to drive back home, and I felt relieved more than sad. The Winters family took me and my friends out to dinner that night, and we celebrated properly without any tension or weird family dynamics. Walking across that stage earlier had felt like proof that Tony and Barry and Dan didn't break me, even though they spent most of my life trying. They wanted me to fail and fall apart, but I made it through anyway. A year after the BBQ, I'm living in a new city 3 hours away, working my first real job at a tech company. My apartment is small, but it's mine, and nobody from my family has the address. I picked this city because I didn't know anyone here, and I wanted to build something that was completely my choice. The job isn't glamorous, but it pays my bills, and my coworkers are normal people who don't know anything about my past. I still see Holden for therapy every other week through video calls, and the sessions help me process the hard days when they come. Some mornings I wake up and feel the weight of everything that happened, but I've learned I'm stronger than I thought I was. I can survive betrayal and manipulation and still build something better on the other side. Word spread through the family and the town about what the cousins did, and they face real social consequences now. Tony got fired from another job when his boss heard the story. Barry's wife left him after finding out about his history of cruelty. Dan moved 2 states away because people in town started avoiding him. It's not perfect justice, and it doesn't erase what they did to me and Tanya and Ashley and Monica. But knowing they can't hurt anyone else the same way brings me real peace. I'm building a life that's entirely mine now, and that matters more than revenge ever could.